The day my mother called me selfish for not handing over my entire savings account, I was standing in my own kitchen holding my phone so tight my knuckles went white. She did not ask quietly. She did not ask once. She told me in the same voice she used when I was 8 years old and had done something wrong that my brother's wedding was a family event and that family meant sacrifice and that I had always been too focused on myself. My brother was standing right there. He said nothing. He never said anything when it mattered. And my father, who was sitting at my kitchen table eating the food I had cooked for them, looked up for exactly 2 seconds, nodded at whatever my mother said, and looked back down. I had been saving for 4 years. 4 years of skipped vacations, second jobs, cheap lunches, and telling myself that one day I would feel stable, and they wanted all of it, not a loan, not a gift they would remember with gratitude. They wanted it because they felt they were owed it. What happened next is something I have never fully told anyone. And the envelope I left at the end of this story, that envelope said everything I had never been able to say out loud. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something real. If your own family looked at the life you built with your own hands and decided it belonged to them, what would you do? Would you give it? Would you stay quiet to keep the peace? Would you smile at the wedding and pretend you were happy? Tell me in the comments, because I think a lot of people watching this right now have been in that exact kitchen. They have heard that exact tone and they stayed silent too. I did for a long time. But I am not silent anymore. Stay with me. My name is Mila, and I want to start at the moment that changed everything, not at the beginning, because the beginning was normal. The beginning looked like love. It looked like a regular family. It looked like parents who worked hard and siblings who fought over the television remote and holidays that felt warm. I want to start at the moment I understood that what I thought was love had actually been a very long, very quiet transaction. And I had been paying into it my whole life without ever reading the receipt. I was 31 years old when my brother Marcus announced his engagement. His fiancée was a woman named Delia, and within 48 hours of that announcement, my mother had already started making financial calculations in her head. I could see it. I had lived with that woman for 22 years. I knew when her brain shifted from emotion into budget mode. She went from hugging Marcus to asking him about venue deposits in the same conversation. And when she looked at me that evening, it was not the look of a mother celebrating with her daughter. It was the look of someone checking an account balance. I want to be fair to my own story here. My family was not evil, they were not monsters. They were people who had built a system a long time ago, probably without fully realizing it, where the person who caused the least conflict absorbed the most cost. That person was me. I was the second child, I was the quiet one. I was the one who got good grades without being asked, who worked through college without complaining, who moved out at 22 and still showed up every Sunday. I was the one who said yes when saying no felt dangerous to the family peace. And over the years, that reputation had calcified into something that felt permanent. Mila would handle it. Mila would pitch in. Mila understood. Mila would not make this difficult. Marcus was 3 years older than me. He had charm and loudness and a laugh that filled rooms. My parents adored him the way some parents adore a child who reflects their own personality back at them. He was not a bad brother in the classic sense. He did not bully me or exclude me from things deliberately. He just existed in a way that took up most of the oxygen in the room, and nobody ever asked if I needed any. That was the dynamic, not dramatic, not abusive. Just a slow, steady pattern of being the one who mattered a little less. And when you grow up like that, you spend a long time not even recognizing it as a problem because it just feels like the weather. When Marcus and Delia set their wedding date for 14 months out, my mother went into full planning mode within days. She was calling vendors, visiting venues, building spreadsheets. I had never seen her more alive. And somewhere in those early weeks, the first mention of money came up. It was casual. My mother said they were going to need to pull together as a family because weddings were expensive and Marcus deserved a beautiful day. I agreed. I thought she meant everyone would chip in something reasonable. I thought she meant what normal people mean when they say that kind of thing. I was wrong. The first direct conversation happened about 3 weeks after the engagement. I was at my parents' house for dinner. And after we ate, my mother sat down at the table with a folder, not a notepad. A folder. She had printed out venue costs, catering estimates, and a rough wedding budget. The total number at the bottom of that page was $62,000. She slid it across the table toward me the way a bank manager slides a loan document. She said that she and my father had their savings, Marcus and Delia had some put aside, and the gap was going to require family support. She looked at me. My father looked at me, Marcus looked at his phone. Delia was not there that night. I asked what family support meant specifically. My mother said they were hoping I could contribute a significant portion of my savings. I asked how much significant meant. She said $20,000. I put my fork down very carefully. I did not yell, I did not cry. I asked her to repeat the number, and she did, with the confidence of someone who had already decided the answer would be yes. $20,000 was almost exactly what I had saved. Not $20,000 of excess money, $20,000 of emergency fund, down payment savings, stability money, the money I looked at on bad days to remind myself that I was going to be okay. That money was not extra. It was the architecture of my future, and my mother said the number like she was asking me to pick up milk on the way home. I told her I needed to think about it. She said she understood, but that the venue deposit was due in 6 weeks. She said it like the deposit deadline was something that had happened to her, not something she had set in motion herself. I drove home that night and sat in my parking lot for 20 minutes before going inside. I was not crying, I was calculating. I was beginning to understand that this situation was not a one-time ask. This was the opening move of something much larger. In the weeks that followed, I did something I had never done carefully before. I started paying attention, not just to the wedding conversations, but to the full financial history of my relationship with my family. I sat down one evening with a notebook and I started writing things down, not obsessively, not with anger. I just wanted to see the picture clearly. What I wrote down over the next 2 hours changed something inside me permanently. Over the previous 6 years since I had been working full-time, I had given my family money on 9 separate occasions. A car repair for Marcus twice, a medical bill for my father that insurance did not cover, a month of my mother's credit card balance when she overspent one winter, a deposit for an apartment Marcus needed when he was moving, 2 rounds of groceries during a month when my parents were short, a flight home for Marcus when he was living in another city and could not afford the ticket. None of these were enormous on their own. Together they added up to just over $11,000. Not one of those times had anyone offered to pay me back. Not one of those times had anyone said, I know this is a lot. Not once had anyone asked whether I could afford it before asking. And now they wanted 20,000 more. I kept thinking about one specific thing. I kept thinking about the folder, the printed spreadsheet, the venue deadline. My mother had not come to me as a mother asking her daughter for help during a hard time. She had come to me as a project manager presenting a budget gap and a timeline. I was a line item, I was the gap. And the fact that she had printed it out, that she had organized it, that she had a folder, told me she had been thinking about this for a while. She knew what she was going to ask before she sat down at that table. She just needed to deliver it in person so I could not say no in a text message. I did not give her an answer in those first 6 weeks. I kept saying I was still thinking. She kept calling. The calls became more frequent and more layered with urgency. The venue deadline came and went. I later found out they made the deposit themselves, but the pressure did not stop. It shifted. Now it was the catering. Now it was the flowers. Now it was the photographer my mother had fallen in love with who cost $3,000 more than their budget allowed. Every 2 weeks, there was a new number attached to a new urgency. I want to tell you about a phone call I received on a Thursday evening about 2 months into this campaign. It was Marcus. He never called me. We texted sometimes and saw each other at family dinners, but Marcus calling my phone in the evening was unusual enough that I answered with a small knot of concern already forming. He did not ask about me. He did not ask how I was doing. He said, Mom says you're being difficult about the wedding stuff. He said it gently. He said it without edge. But that word, difficult, landed on me like something heavy. I had been called difficult before in my family, and I understood what it meant. It meant I was not yet agreeing. It meant discomfort of someone else's wanting was being explained as a flaw in me. I asked Marcus what he actually needed from me. He said he thought it would mean a lot to everyone if I could contribute something real, something meaningful to his wedding. I asked him what meaningful meant specifically. He paused and then said, well, whatever you can do, which was not an answer, which was the answer people give when they want the other person to volunteer a number so they do not have to say it out loud. I told him I loved him and I would do what I could. I hung up and sat very still. That night I made a decision. I was not going to keep drifting through this. I was going to get clear on what I actually wanted to do, separate from what anyone expected of me. I got out my notebook again. I wrote down 2 things. What do I actually have, and what is this actually going to cost me, not in dollars alone? The first answer was clear. I had $22,000 saved. The second answer took longer to write. Giving this money would not just cost me the money. It would cost me the down payment I had been planning. It would cost me the sense of safety that had taken 4 years to build. It would cost me the version of myself that had finally started to believe she was allowed to build something for herself. It would reset me, and what would I get in return? A thank you maybe. A seat at the wedding, definitely. And the clear message that my savings were available for family use whenever the family decided they needed them. That was the part that kept me up, not the 20,000, the message it would send, the door it would open, the pattern it would confirm, because I knew my family. I knew that once I said yes to this, the next ask would come from a place of precedent. You did it before, you have money, this is family. Around this time, I started talking to someone outside my family for the first time about all of this. Her name was Patricia, and she was a friend from work, older than me, someone who had lived through versions of this herself. I told her the whole story over lunch one day, and she listened without interrupting. When I was done, she asked me one question. She said, Mila, have they ever even once acted like your financial well-being mattered to them as much as their own needs? I opened my mouth to say yes, and I could not find the example. I sat there reaching for a memory, and the memory was not there. Patricia nodded slowly. She did not say I told you so. She just said, that is the answer, honey. That is the whole answer. After that lunch, something shifted in how I was seeing things. I was not just looking at this wedding request anymore. I was looking at a pattern that had been running for years. I was looking at a family system that had a very specific role assigned to me, and that role was to be available, to be flexible, to be the one who could absorb cost without complaint. And the more clearly I saw it, the harder it became to unsee. I started doing something I had never done before in my family relationships. I started documenting, nothing dramatic, I just saved voicemails, I took screenshots of texts, I wrote dates and amounts in my notebook with short descriptions of what was asked and what I said. I was not planning revenge, I was not even sure what I was planning, I just felt for the first time that I needed a record, that something in me understood the situation might escalate before it resolved. The escalation came faster than I expected. About 4 months before the wedding, I went to a family dinner and my mother had Delia's mother there, a woman named Sandra. I had met Sandra twice. She was warm and well dressed and talked about the wedding with the focused energy of someone who had been planning it since Delia was 12. At dinner, my mother announced to the table in front of Sandra that Mila had agreed to help cover a significant portion of the wedding costs. She said it with warmth. She said it with pride. She looked at me with a smile that expected me to confirm it. I had not agreed to anything, I had said I was still thinking, I had never said yes. And she announced it in front of a guest at a dinner table in a way that made disagreeing feel like a public humiliation of everyone in the room. I felt the heat move up my neck, I felt every eye at that table, and I did what I had always done in those moments. I smiled and said nothing, I let it pass. I ate my food and talked about other things and drove home furious. But this time I did not just sit with the fury. I wrote it down, I wrote the date, I wrote what she said, I wrote how she said it, I wrote that I had not agreed, I kept the record, and I started slowly building the clarity I would need for what came next. The next significant moment was a Saturday afternoon, about 3.5 months before the wedding, when my mother called to tell me she had arranged for my savings to be transferred to the wedding Joe. An account my parents had set up with Marcus and Delia. She said it like it was already done, like she was informing me of an administrative step that had already been handled. She said the account information would be texted to me and that I should do the transfer by the end of the week. She said thank you before I could say anything. She said I love you and hung up. I sat holding my phone for a long time after that call. There are moments in your life when you understand with complete and total clarity that the person speaking to you does not see you, not as an adult, not as someone with her own financial life and her own plans and her own needs. They see a resource, they see something available for use, and the love they feel is not separate from that, it is woven into it. They can love you and still see you primarily as a function. That realization does not arrive with a crash. It arrives quietly like a door closing in another room. I did not do the transfer, I did not call my mother back that day. The next morning I called my bank and I moved my savings, not out of the country, not into hiding. I moved them into a new account, a high-yield savings account I had been thinking about opening for a while that was in my name only and that had a simple but important feature. Transfers out required a 72-hour advance notice period that I had to initiate personally. It was not a lock, it was a pause. A pause that made impulse-driven transfers impossible and that gave me 72 hours to think before any money moved. I set it up calmly. I felt calmer than I had in months. My mother texted me the account details that evening. I read them and did not respond. She texted again the next day asking if I had received the information. I said yes, I got it, I am working through some things and will be in touch. She texted back a single word, soon. She meant it as a reminder. I read it as a map of how she understood our relationship. What happened next is the part that still makes my chest feel strange when I think about it, not because it was the worst thing, but because it showed me the full picture so clearly that I could not look away from it. I was not on the wedding website. Marcus and Delia had built a wedding website. It had their photos, their story, the venue address, the registry, and a page titled Our Wedding Party. I found the website because Delia's cousin mentioned it at a family dinner and I looked it up that night. The wedding party page listed every bridesmaid, every groomsman, and every family member who had been given an official role in the ceremony. There was a section for family contributors that listed my parents by name and had a warm, small paragraph about their generosity and love. Marcus had 2 groomsmen who were described by name. Delia had 3 bridesmaids described by name. My name was not on that page, not in the wedding party, not in the family contributors section, not anywhere. I clicked through every page twice to make sure I had not missed something. I had not missed anything, I simply was not there. The person they had been calling and pressuring for $20,000 for 4 months was not acknowledged anywhere on the official document they had built to represent their wedding to the world. I closed the laptop slowly. I did not react immediately, I sat with it, and what I felt was not the hot, sharp pain of being excluded from a party, it was something older and quieter, it was the recognition that this was the most honest thing that had happened in this entire situation. The website told the truth. The website showed me clearly and without ambiguity what my role actually was. I was not family in the way that got mentioned. I was not a person whose presence was being celebrated. I was a funding source, and they had not even thought to hide it because they had not thought about me at all. I was so far from the center of this that my absence did not register as a problem until I pointed it out. Which I did not do immediately, I kept it, I added it to the record. Things moved quickly after that. With 10 weeks until the wedding, my mother's calls became daily. The tone shifted from urging to something closer to demanding. She told me I was being selfish. She told me that family did not operate on individual financial calculations. She told me that my father had sacrificed things for me when I was young, and this was a moment to return that investment. That word, investment, made me go cold. She said it without thinking. She said it the way you say a word when it is actually how you see the world. Her child was an investment. Her son's wedding was a return window, and I, Mila, was being asked to pay out. I told her I would come over on Saturday to talk in person. She said good, and there was relief in her voice, the relief of someone who believed the conversation would end in her favor if she could just get me in the room. I understood why she believed that. Every previous difficult conversation with me had ended that way. But I was not the same Mila who had walked into dinner 4 months ago. On Friday night, I sat down and wrote a letter. Not a mean letter, not a screaming letter, a clear letter, 3 pages handwritten. I wrote about the $11,000 I had given over 6 years. I wrote the specific occasions and the amounts and the dates I remembered. I wrote about the dinner where my mother announced my agreement in front of Sandra when no agreement had been made. I wrote about the phone call where she told me to transfer my savings as if it were already decided. I wrote about the wedding website, I wrote about the word investment, and then I wrote clearly and without anger what I had decided. I was not going to contribute $20,000 to the wedding. I was not going to contribute any portion of my savings. I was going to give Marcus and Delia a gift, a real and generous gift from a place of genuine love, but it would be my choice in my amount on my terms. And I was writing this letter because I did not trust that a conversation would be allowed to end with my decision intact. I needed something that said what I said in the words I chose, that they could not later rephrase or revise. I put the letter in an envelope, I sealed it, I held it for a long moment, then I put it in my bag and went to sleep. Saturday came, I drove to my parents' house. My father was there, Marcus was there, that surprised me. This was not what I had expected. My mother had assembled the group. She wanted the full weight of the room on her side. I recognized the strategy because she had used it before, not in large ways, but in small family moments where numbers were meant to create pressure. 3 to 1 was meant to feel different than 1 to 1. I sat down, I was offered tea, I accepted it, I was calm. My mother began the conversation by saying they had all been worried about me lately, that I seemed stressed and distant, and that they wanted to make sure everything was okay. It was a disarming opening. She was leading with concern so that my resistance would look like aggression. I recognized it, I let her finish. I said I was fine, I said I appreciated everyone being here, I said I had been thinking very carefully about the wedding contribution and I had written some thoughts down because I wanted to be clear. I reached into my bag and took out the envelope, I placed it on the table between us. My mother looked at it, my father looked at it, Marcus looked at it and then looked at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. He looked uncertain. I told them the letter explained where I stood clearly and completely. I told them I loved them and I loved Marcus and I genuinely wanted his wedding to be beautiful. And then I told them I was not going to contribute my savings. I said it quietly. I said it without shaking. I said it and waited. My mother was silent for a moment. Then she said that I was being selfish. She said it in the same voice she had used on the phone. My father said that this was a family moment and family showed up. Marcus said nothing, and that silence from him in that moment was the most honest response in the room. I said I understood how they felt, I said I was sorry if it was hard, and I said that my decision was final, not negotiable, not open for a longer conversation. Final. I told them the letter was theirs to read and keep. I finished my tea, I hugged my mother who was stiff and did not hug back fully. I hugged my father, I looked at Marcus and I said I hoped the wedding would be everything he dreamed. He nodded, he still had not said anything. I drove home, my hands were completely steady on the wheel, that surprised me. For months I had imagined this confrontation as something terrifying, something that would require me to survive it, but it did not feel like surviving. It felt like arriving, like I had been walking toward that room for years and had finally gotten there. The calls started that afternoon. My mother called twice. My father called once, which was unusual because my father almost never called. I let them go to voicemail. I listened to the messages later that evening. My mother's first message was hurt. Her second was sharper. My father's was short and formal and asked me to reconsider for the sake of family unity. I noted all three. I did not call back that day. By Sunday, the calls had expanded. My aunt on my mother's side, a woman named Rochelle who I loved but who had always been my mother's echo in family matters, texted me to say she had heard what happened and that she was praying for peace. Underneath the prayer language was a clear implication that the problem was mine to fix. I thanked her and said I was at peace. Marcus finally called Sunday evening. It was the longest conversation we had ever had about something real. He started by saying he was not calling to pressure me. I tall. D him, I appreciated that. He said he had read the letter and there was a pause after he said it, a weighted pause, the pause of someone who has just been handed information they could not dismiss. He said some of what I wrote about the money over the years he had not thought about. He said he had not realized the total. I told him I had not either until I sat down and added it up. He was quiet again. Then he said he was sorry that I felt like I had been treated as a resource and not a sister. He said it awkwardly. He was not practiced at this kind of language, but he said it and it was real and I believed him. I told him I did not want the wedding to be shadowed by this. I told him I had something for him and Delia that I wanted to give before the wedding. I told him it was from me with love on my own terms and that it came with nothing owed. He said okay. He sounded tired and slightly undone in a way that I had never heard from him before. I think the letter did that. I think seeing 11 years of a pattern written clearly in someone else's hand does something to you that an argument never can. What I had for Marcus and Delia was not $20,000. It was not $10,000. It was an envelope with a check for $2,000 and a handwritten card that said, I am so happy for you. This is from me with love freely given. It was an amount I could give without resetting my life. It was an amount that was genuinely generous relative to my actual participation in this event. And I gave it 3 weeks before the wedding, quietly, at a dinner that was just the three of us, because I wanted Marcus to know that my limits were not the same as my love. He held the envelope and looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at me and said, You did not have to do this. I said, I know. I said I wanted to, and I meant it. That distinction, doing something because I wanted to rather than because I was pressured to, felt like the most important thing I had done in years. The wedding was 6 weeks away when the second wave hit. My mother had apparently decided that Marcus's relative softening was a problem to be corrected. She escalated. She began telling extended family members a version of events in which I had abandoned my brother in his most important moment. The version she was sharing did not include the $11,000. It did not include the false announcement at dinner. It did not include the phone call about the transfer. It included only the part where Mila said no. I found out about this through my cousin Bree, who called me not to judge me but to warn me. Bree was younger than me by 4 years and had always been one of the few people in my extended family who saw my family dynamics with clear eyes. She said, Mila, your mom has been talking and people are getting a one-sided story. I asked her what she had heard. She told me. My mother had characterized me as someone who had the money and chose to hoard it while my brother planned the most important day of his life. She had said I was jealous of Delia. She had implied I had always resented Marcus's place in the family, which was such an inversion of reality that it almost made me laugh. I thanked Bree. I told her the fuller picture. I did not do it defensively. I did it calmly with the dates and the amounts and the events that my mother had left out. Bree listened and at the end said, I figured it was something like this. She said she would not spread my side of the story because she did not want to be in the middle, but she also told me she was not going to repeat my mother's version to anyone else either. That was enough. That was more than enough. What my mother did not know was that I had the letter. And the letter existed in the physical world in a way that her verbal version of events could not override. I had copies, 3 of them, one at home, one photographed and stored in my cloud, one in a sealed envelope at Patricia's apartment. Patricia had offered to hold one when I told her about it. She said, You should have a copy somewhere safe that is not your house. She was right, she usually was. The month before the wedding was cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. My mother and I were communicating only through short, practical texts. My father was staying out of it in his way, which meant he was not calling me but also was not correcting my mother. Marcus was quieter than usual. Delia, who had been warm to me in the early engagement period, was keeping her distance, which I understood. She was navigating her future mother-in-law, and that was not a simple position to be in. One thing happened in that month that I did not expect. Delia's mother, Sandra, called me. We had exchanged numbers at one of the early dinners. She said she had heard there had been some difficulty and she wanted to reach out. I was guarded at first. I did not know which version of the story she had heard or which side she was calling to Ray. Present, but Sandra was surprising. She said she had heard my mother's version and that she had also spoken to Delia, who had told her a somewhat different picture. She said she was not calling to take sides. She said she was calling because she believed weddings had a way of bringing out the most buried financial tensions in families, and she had seen it before, and she simply wanted to say she hoped I would be at the wedding and that she hoped I knew I was welcome there. I told Sandra I was going to be at the wedding. I told her I would not miss it. She sounded relieved. We talked for 20 minutes about things unrelated to the conflict, and by the end of the call, I felt unexpectedly settled. There were people in this extended circle who were not operating from the same playbook as my mother. That mattered. 4 days before the wedding, something happened that I had not planned for. I got a notification from my bank, not from the new account where I had moved my savings, from my regular checking account. It was a notification that someone had attempted to initiate an external transfer from my account using my account number and routing number. The transfer had been blocked because it did not match my registered devices or usual behavior, and the bank had flagged it as suspicious and required additional verification that did not come. I called the bank immediately. They confirmed the attempted transfer. They told me the details of the originating request without revealing the source of the attempt. The amount someone had tried to transfer out of my account was $18,000, not 20, 18. like someone had done the math on what was left after accounting for the 2,000 I had already given Marcus. I sat with that number for a long time. I do not know with certainty who initiated that transfer attempt. I will not say I know because I do not have that proof. What I know is that someone who knew my account number, which I had shared internally during a family conversation about the supposed contribution, had tried to take money from my checking account 4 days before the wedding. I know that the amount was calculated. I know that the timing was deliberate. And I know that whatever my family thought of me, however much they felt they were owed this money, that attempt crossed a line that had nothing to do with family dynamics and everything to do with law. I called my bank and I put additional security on every account. I changed my passwords. I changed my online banking credentials. I flagged the attempted transfer as unauthorized. The bank opened a case. I took a screenshot of the notification. I added it to the record. Then I called Patricia. I did not call my mother. I did not call Marcus. I called Patricia and I told her what had happened, and she said, Mila, this is not a family disagreement anymore. This is a financial crime. She said it quietly and without drama, the way you say something true. I told her I knew. She asked me what I was going to do. I said I was going to the wedding. I was going to sit in my seat, which my family had assigned me with the dignity of a guest rather than the proximity of a sibling. I had been placed in the third row, not the front row where immediate family sat, even though I was immediate family. I was going to smile and celebrate my brother's marriage and wish Delia a long and happy life. And then I was going to do whatever I needed to do afterward. She said that sounded right. She said it sounded very much like me. I was not sure how to take that. I decided to take it as a compliment. The wedding day arrived. It was held at a venue about 40 minutes from my parents' house, a large and beautiful event space with high ceilings and a garden attached. The flowers were extraordinary. Delia was breathtaking. Marcus cried when he saw her, which was the most unexpectedly tender thing I had ever seen from him and which made my own eyes fill without my permission. For a few hours, the wedding was just a wedding. It was beautiful and warm and full of people who loved this couple and wanted good things for them. I sat in the third row. I had dressed carefully, not to outshine anyone, not to perform anything, just to feel good in my own skin on a day that had complicated meaning. I smiled genuinely. I danced at the reception. I talked to Delia's family and found them lovely. I found Sandra at the cocktail hour and she held my hand for a moment and said she was glad I was there, and she said it in a way that felt like it meant more than the words. My mother was gracious in public. She hugged me and told me I looked beautiful, and her hug was warmer than the one at my parents' house 6 weeks earlier. My father shook my hand and said he was glad I came, which from my father was something close to an apology. Marcus, when he found me between the ceremony and the dinner, pulled me into a hug that lasted longer than usual. He said, "Thank you for being here." Said, of course I am here. None of the financial conflict was visible on the surface of that day, and I did not surface it. I had not come to the wedding to make a point. I had come because I loved my brother. Those two things, the love and the limits, were not contradictions. I was learning that they could exist at the same time inside the same person. At one point during the reception, I overheard a conversation near the bar between two relatives I did not know well. They were talking about the wedding, about how beautiful it was, and one of them mentioned that the family had really pulled together to make it happen. I did not insert myself. I smiled into my drink and thought about my $2,000 and my new savings account with its 72-hour transfer notice, and my 3 copies of a letter and a bank case number I had written in my notebook at home. Let them say the family pulled together. The family did, just not the way they had planned. The weeks after the wedding were a slow recalibration. My mother called 2 days after the event. She was warm. She said the wedding had been perfect and that she was so happy and that she loved me. I told her I loved her too. I did. The love was real. It had always been real. But the love now existed inside a structure I had built for it, a structure with walls and doors that I controlled. I did not say any of that. I just said I loved her and told her I was glad the wedding was beautiful. My father sent me a text a week later. It said, "Mila, I know things have been hard. I am proud of you." That was it. 4 words in the middle, "I am proud of you," dropped without context, without explanation, without the conversation those words deserved. I sat with that text for a long time. I thought about what it cost him to send it. I thought about all the things it did not say and probably never would. I saved it. It went in the record too, not as evidence against him, but as evidence that something in that house had shifted. Marcus called 3 weeks after the wedding. He and Delia were back from the honeymoon. He sounded like himself again, the easy, loud version of himself, but there was something underneath it that had not been there before. He asked me how I was, really asked, not as a formality. I told him I was good. I told him I had been making some changes, some financial adjustments, some new plans. He asked what kind of plans. I told him about the down payment I was saving for. He said he had not known I was trying to buy a place. I said I had been trying for a few years. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I am sorry, Mila. I think I was not paying attention to your life the way I should have been." That sentence from Marcus cost him something. I could hear it. I told him I appreciated that. I told him we were going to be okay. I believed it. What happened with the bank case is something I will not detail completely because some of it is still ongoing and some of it involves people I am still in relationship with. What I will say is this: the bank found enough to confirm the attempted transfer was not a system error. They confirmed a human-initiated attempt. They provided the information to me. I have it. I have shared it with one attorney who helped me understand what my options were. I did not press forward with legal action. I made that choice deliberately, not because nothing happened, but because I weighed what I would gain against what I would lose, and I decided the gain was not worth the family fracture. But they know that I know. I made sure of that, not with a confrontation, with a single conversation with my mother, private, calm, in her kitchen 6 weeks after the wedding. I told her what the bank had found. I told her I had documentation. I told her I had spoken to an attorney. I told her I was not pursuing it. And then I told her very clearly that this was the last time anything like this would ever happen, and that if it did, my decision would be different. She did not deny it directly, she did not explain it. She cried, and then she said she had been so afraid, so stressed, so desperate for the wedding to be right, and she had not been thinking clearly. She said she was sorry. It was not the apology of someone who fully understood what they had done, but it was the most honest thing she had said to me in a long time. I accepted it. I accepted it because I was not looking for a punishment. I was looking for change. And the change I needed was not in her. It was in me, in the walls I had built, in the accounts with transfer delays and the copies of letters at Patricia's apartment and the attorney whose number was saved in my phone. I did not forgive my mother in the way that means forgetting. I forgave her in the way that means I am not going to let this poison me. Those are different things. The first kind of forgiveness asks you to pretend. The second kind asks you to let go of the weight while keeping the knowledge. I kept the knowledge, I put the weight down. It has now been almost a year since the wedding. Marcus and Delia are well. She's kind to me when we see each other, and Marcus and I have had more real conversations in the last 12 months than in the previous 5 years combined. My mother and I are in a different place. We are not estranged. We are in contact, we have dinners, she calls me on my birthday. But there is a new temperature to our relationship, a cooler temperature, a more honest one. She no longer asks me for money. She has not once in 11 months made a financial request of any kind. I do not know if she will again. I believe if she does, I will be ready. My savings are growing. I have been approved for a mortgage pre-qualification. I am looking at properties in a neighborhood I chose for myself, not because anyone else thought it was a good idea, not because it was convenient for family gatherings, but because I walked through it one afternoon and felt something settle in my chest in a way that felt like mine. That feeling, that quiet sense of this is mine, is the thing I had been working toward for 4 years without fully naming it. I can name it now. The envelope I left on my parents' table that Saturday was not revenge. It was not punishment. It was not even a statement, not really. It was a truth written out, offered to people who had never fully seen me in the hope that they might look at the numbers and the dates and the words and understand that I had been paying attention all along, that I had loved them without conditions for a long time, that my limits were not a withdrawal of love. That they were the first honest thing I had given them in years. I do not know if the letter fully landed. I do not know if my mother read every page or skimmed it or folded it into a drawer. I know Marcus read it. I know it moved him. I know that is enough. There is a version of this story where I gave the $20,000 and sat in the third row at the wedding and smiled and said nothing and then went home and felt the particular hollowness of someone who has been hollowed out. I have lived close to that version many times in smaller ways. I know what it feels like. It feels like performing generosity from a place of fear. It feels like buying peace with your own future. It costs more than the number on the check. It costs the part of you that knows your own worth. I chose the other version. I chose the envelope. I chose the letter. I chose the calm conversation and the attorney's number and the new account with the 72-hour pause. I chose to show up at the wedding in a dress I loved and dance and wish my brother joy from a place of genuine feeling rather than financial obligation. I chose, for the first time in my adult life, to be generous on my own terms or not at all. That choice did not make everything easy. It made some things harder for a while. It changed relationships in ways I am still living with, but it did not hollow me out. It did something the opposite of hollowing. It filled something in me that had been empty for years. The part that knows it is allowed to exist, to have, to plan, to build, to say no, to love without bleeding. That part is full now, and it is mine. If this story felt familiar, if you recognize that kitchen, that dinner table, that tone in someone's voice when they say family and mean something else entirely, then I want you to know something. You are not selfish for having limits. You are not cold for protecting what you built. You are not difficult for finally deciding that love does not mean giving until you are empty. Tell me in the comments, what was the moment for you? The moment you finally stopped and said no more. Because I think there are more of us than any of us realize. And the ones who had that moment and came through it, I would love to hear from you. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you're still in the middle of your version of this story, still trying to find the words, still trying to find the courage to write the letter, I hope this helped. It gets quieter on the other side, I promise.